Hello stellar people and welcome back to the channel. My name is Trey and today we are continuing with Vampire Hunter D ink sketches. Here we have the final one, which is my favorite. It is seated Vampire Hunter D and I just love this pose. He looks like he's in between actions. We don't know if he's drawing his sword for some particular reason or if he's sheathing his sword because an action has just been taken and he is now reposed. So now we're going to make something similar in this line with a character that I have created called Lore of the Silver Hand. So last month we practiced with our tools, inking with Lore of the Silver Hand, and then we moved on to doing these narrative sketches, ink sketches. And the last week we did one where I wanted to play with the shadows, the diagonals of these shadows and a monster or figure. And this is what we did last week. But to prepare for this week's image, I usually start off with these very small thumbnail sketches done very loosely, very lightly, and very quickly, just to get out some ideas on how I can compose and draw the figure in a way that I would like to make a full in-depth illustration. And at this stage, I'm just moving quickly. I'm not focusing too hard or too much on any one thing. You just want to get your ideas out. Sometimes I move the character around. I try different positions, different poses, different structures, different compositions, whatever I can think of, just to get the idea or multiple ideas that I can then jump off from to make a better illustration. And something that I like to do currently is you take an index card, a very small card which can be orientated vertically or horizontally, and you can mess with composition as it simulates a longer or larger format, and you just play with it. And I use ink or a pen so I don't need to erase, and you're just again trying to get your ideas out of your head and onto the paper. And after doing all of the smaller sketches and that preliminary drawing, I do like the original Vampire Hunter D, that posture, that pose. I love that image. So I decided to stick very closely to that for this Lore of the Silver Hand image, where he has the unicorn horn sword in his left hand. He's relaxed or in a more relaxed pose, foot on a table or something, and his right arm and hand just about to go for the sword. So I'm going for more of the beginning of some sort of action to be taking place. And I do it as best I can. I do shading, I work on the face, try to get the position and everything I can think of out of my head onto paper. If I can remember what it looks like, try to stick closer to it and just play with it. And again, at this small, very small level, I try to simulate everything that I want to get accomplished in a larger piece. So I work out shadows, work out equipment, his costuming, everything I can think of at this small scale, because it's easier to change or to disregard and move fast at this small scale before moving on to something that you would take a lot more time with, right? This is the time for experimentation and to move quickly. I also bust out my little Sharpie-like pen, and I use that for the darkness of the hair and the clothes, just to get a better idea of where this stuff will lay in the final image. And so here we have a rough approximation of what we're going for in a very small index card size form. And now we can take this up larger and to another level. So let's go. Whoa. So once more, I take a look at the original image of Vampire Hunter D, and I try to note all the particulars of what I like about it. Then I shrink it down, and this is in computer. I'm now using Photoshop. So I have it shrunken down in the corner so that I can only see what is necessary. And then I work out myself the composition. So I make little small thumbnail page borders, and then the little figure inside of a simulated page. And I just work it out again before moving on to something more fleshed out in computer. Now, I'm pretty flexible when I'm doing my art. I could either do traditional or I could do computer. I find that doing the early stuff in computer kind of helps move along the pace of an illustration. If I have a lot more time, I loved doing traditional, just working out my hand skills. But when I need to go fast, I usually go for the computer. So now I am blocking in the actual figure, and I just find it easier just to mess around and play around with it in computer. I'm not as tight or feel like I'm wasting paper or whatever, because I can do just iterations upon iterations digitally. And then once I'm done with it, I can then print it out. But this is a very early form or early stage where I use a lot of computer, especially if I have deadlines to move the thing along at a quicker pace. Also, depending on the time I have, I can work on it in stops and starts. I can leave it for a couple of hours or a day or so, and then come back to it and then try. Sometimes it helps to have fresh eyes on anything that you're doing, because sometimes you'll look at something and it'll look fine one day, and then the next day you're like, I don't like such and such so much, and you want to redraw it and whatnot. And so this is after the first day, I come back, reshape it, move things around, try to shape it up to get it into a place that I feel happy with. And I like how his face now is more than slightly altered. And you just keep plugging away until you have something that you can then print out and then work on top of, which brings us to the next stage. Sometimes I like having the underneath lines because it shows where you came from. And plus you can sometimes use it for detailing. You'll see certain things in it that you can use to define the form. The digital mock-up with the character, unicorn horn sword, the values, rough indication of the placement of objects. And now we're ready to take this to better paper before we start inking. And then I use my trusty light table with the image underneath and sturdier paper on top, Strathmore, I think rough. And I bring that to a nice tight pencil and get ready for inking. All right, so we have this rough sketch printed out, and we use this to then get it down to better paper. Strathmore, I think it's rough, or is it smooth? I think it's rough. And we have the nice image ready to be inked. So let's get to inking. So I have Winsor & Newton Series 7, number 3, a sable brush, natural fibers, and let's get to inking. I usually just smooth it out just a little bit. And now we go from this side all around. And we're just doing this for the hair. So I'm using this brush for the hair because I like how with a brush, a natural brush, it feels like it's more alive, and there's that thick and thin tapered lines that you can get with a brush that I really like. And I'm still trying to experiment with the brushes other than pens. And so this is good practice, but I like having natural forms, and especially the hair, done with a brush. And what I like about inking with a brush is it gives it a bit of a more natural, undulating feel. It's not stiff, it's not terribly hard. It's more on vibes, I guess, or feelings. And also, while I can do the whole image with a brush, I like separating it out. I'm like doing different things for different parts. I'm still practicing. I'm trying to find a steady flow or a steady rhythm or a pattern that I'll pretty much do often. I like routine and doing the same thing over and over again. Sometimes I like to shake it up. Well, actually, a lot of times I like to shake it up. But I'm trying to find a natural shorthand or a natural rhythm with each of my tools. And so this practice with the hair and the brush is something I just like doing. And when I get better at it, then I might switch to just doing the whole figure with brush. But that is for the future. And once the hair is done, I'm gone to a nib. This is a CrowQuill, and I use this for the body parts that I want bolder, thicker lines, and then I'll switch to the GPen for some of the detail work. But I try to work over the whole figure just to get all of that down before we switch to another nib. And then after that, we'll do washes and then pens. Okay, so now we have the GPen, smaller tip than the CrowQuill. And I use this mostly for the detailing, the first pass of detailing, before switching to Microns and Copics. And now one thing I like to note is that as an artist, you'll find processes and patterns that you usually do over and over again. You don't have to, but it just kind of seems like it turns out that way. And for me, I usually do the face with this GPen nib. I don't know why. I could do the same with a CrowQuill or with the pens, but I don't know why. It's just something I do. And you'll notice like patterns if you keep doing certain things after a while. And it's something that I always do. Face has to be done with this GPen. And maybe one day I'll do something different just to shake it up, to snap that pattern and, figure it out why. But it's just something I find interesting to note. And at this phase of the process, I use the pen to get the major forms of the head and the face, before then switching for the first pass of doing pens to get the smaller, intricate details that I don't trust myself to do with this nib. I also like using the pen for this fur-like texture, which is just hash marks and curved lines, small detailed curved lines for this fur thing that is wrapped around his waist. I like doing this particularly. Okay, now it's time for detailing with microns. And usually this is the point where I bounce around different areas, different sizes, and just noodle it out until I feel satisfied with it. And then we'll move on to the dark. Now, one thing I must note is that once I have the clean outer lines, I feel like I hit a milestone with the image. And then I switch to the microns and pens for the details, starting with the face. I usually always start with the face because I feel like if I can get that done and squared off and out of the way, we have made a great strides towards making a completed piece. So again, I go in very finely. One of the finer pens, this is an 01, and I do the details of the face, giving them finer lines before then moving on to the rest of the body. Also, of course, I use the pens for straighter lines with the ruler, which it's great for because it's very controlled. I don't really exactly trust myself with the nibs, although there are ways to do it. I still haven't quite mastered that yet, but it's all learning. But yeah, I use pens for more straight edges and more mechanical things. And that's just how I like to do it. So I nearly forgot the the background. And if you check out the original Yoshitaka Amano's Vampire Hunter D, there's not much in the way of background. It's like a line, a chair, well, an impression of a chair, and an impression of a table. Nothing is really fleshed out, so I'm not too concerned with it, as I'm trying to keep that same energy. But I will define some things. So I have my little brush, synthetic brush pen, and we're just gonna flesh this out just a little bit. Nothing too crazy. I think there's like a line in the background. And there we go. There's a barely there. I can reinforce it later with some blacks and spot blacks and whatnot, but that is that. Okay, so now we have the lines mostly done. We need to do some detailing, but we'll leave that for the end. So now we're gonna do some ink wash. Ink wash where I have watered down. I have just a little bit of ink and then more water in it. And I have some ink that has just a little bit of water but more ink in it, but it's a little bit washed down. And I use these in tandem, but usually I start with this. So let's go. And now we are at the fun but messy ink wash stage. And a lot of artists can do just values with just inks, dark inks, and a pen. I myself like to use a brush and do an ink wash. There's just something about it for me that I enjoy doing. So if you enjoy doing something, just keep doing it. You know, it doesn't mean, I don't want to learn other ways of doing things and hatching and cross hatching to make the darks and values and whatnot. But for me, I love doing the ink wash. I think it feels like painting to me, and I think that's why I like it. But it's one of the messier phases because I can smear it, I can run my hand through it, and generally I can make a mess. So I try to be slow and careful at this stage, but I like doing it, so I'll just continue to do it. So here we have the first pass of the ink wash. I've done 2 levels on this waist area, but now it's time for some ink wash plus some staining with some more saturated inks. So let's get to it. Now usually for inks, I don't go past 3 layers of ink wash. This one I just gave it 1 base layer, and now I'm doing the wetter or diluted ink and then staining in some darker ink into it. So it's not truly black, but it's dark enough, and then I can do hatching with a pen to give it just some slight variations of value. But of course, I'm still learning. I'm still having fun with it. I'm just trying to figure out what my process is, but I enjoy doing it. And of course, one of the most important parts is the hair, this large mane of hair. Since he's a wandering warrior, I always thought he's not going to have a barber or get it trimmed up very often if he's out on the road just wandering the world. So he has like this huge mane of hair, and I like that it's, it crowns his face, like that dark shape, punches out his face pretty well value wise. And I kind of like doing his hair. It's this messy tangle of like a mane or something. Then once I have the figure mostly blocked in with the darks, then I work on the background, and all I really know is that I wanted the left hand, which is his silver hand, his cursed hand, if you will. I wanted that to be surrounded by dark, and I didn't really think about the background, but in the original, there isn't much of a background, so I thought I could more or less get away with it. But I just wanted to punch up the left hand especially. So I'm using the darkest area for that. And then to offset that, on the opposite side, on the opposite upper, I also do some loose, wet ink. I'm not too particularly bothered or concerned with the background. I'm just trying to punch it up and make the background at least a little bit more interesting than just a figure. But it depends on what you're going for. In the last one, I had a more defined background, but given that the nature of the original, I thought this was a fair approximation, or something that I was fairly interested in. So here we have the Inkwash's ink staining on top of that. And now it's time for detailing. So I have my Microns. I'll use also some Copics. And now it's time for the detailing proper, where we smooth everything out and get everything into place just the way I like it. Now, when I was in school learning about art, I had a teacher once tell me that in painting, you try to figure out where your darkest darks are and where your lightest lights are. And since now I have in ink my darkest darks, which is the hair crowning his face, I can then go in with a pen and build out the structure, sharpen up the edges, redefine things now that I know where my darkest darks are. And especially since it surrounds the face, it'll punch out the face, meaning that there's the highest level of contrast there. And so I'm focusing on that with the most details, and that's where the focus of the viewer's eyes will usually go to the face, and I try to make that the most interesting part of the image. And at this stage of the image, I have my small pens or various pens that I bounce around the image, and I bounce around with pens, defining and redefining areas of the image until I'm happy with it. There's a lot of shaping up and detailing and adding structure to what can be a bit of a mess once I'm done with the broad inking and the ink wash. Also of note for me is that I'm trying to figure out ways of hatching and cross hatching that works for me. I've just barely started doing it, so I'm still trying to figure out if I'm doing it correctly, or I'm just trying to have fun with it as I learn the process of doing it. But I like how you can have values and give values to the form with just lines going hatching and cross hatching, which is pretty interesting for me. Okay, so now we have most of the detailing done. I could still work it, but we're going to move on to some whiteout and correction fluid. So I have the white jelly roll, and I usually start off with this. And what I first do is I want to touch up this. So there's that. And correcting anything that you think needs correcting. So this straight line, I have flubbed it a little bit. So we're going to straighten that. Also down here, because sometimes you get over exuberant and bad things can happen. Also sometimes I can do effects. Not sure if that's at all visible. Now I usually start with this one and then transfer to this one. And sometimes you'll see things after you're done, but that's okay. That's just how it goes sometimes. So after this one, then we can use Presto, shake it up, and this one sits more on top. Anything else, and again, you can do sometimes effects, but I think that's just about it. And that is whiteout. I think I want one more little bit, just a little bit. Too much. So you gotta be careful. Okay, so now mistakes have been made, and it has been made with one of the most important parts, and that is this eye, where I have too much came out of the whiteout, and so now I have an X-Acto knife, and what I can do is sculpt it and scratch some of this, and that's what I like about this whiteout that sits on top, in that I can sculpt it how I wish. And also with this, Okay, and now that I have that, I can go back in, because it looks a little bit duller, and stack on top more. All right, and I think that is just about that. All right, I think that is that. Yeah, I'm gonna stop it, put the cap on this, because we don't want to cut ourselves, which I have done before. So that is, and that was Lore of the Silverhand ink sketch. But let's break down how we got here. First, we started with an ink thumb, then a worked up ink thumb, then a sketch, and then the clean inks. And so now this is the final of the sketches for Lore of the Silverhand based off of Vampire Hunter D. Vampire Hunter D Reposed is what we used as a jumping off point for this. Now this is the closest to what the original was, but I love the original so much that I am okay with that. So that concludes the ink sketches based off the work of Yoshitaka Amano, Vampire Hunter D, and the mock-ups made by me of Lore of the Silverhand based off of those works. And that was really, really fun. I learned a lot about, can I do things quickly? Ink sketches, can I go through the whole process of inking in a style that I have kind of built up as to be, I guess, my de facto. And now we can go forward with knowing a little bit more than we did before. And that's great. So thank you for joining me. I have been Trey Hodges. You can find my work at treyhodges.com. Power to all the creators. And until next time, keep shining.